before the story begins. Some loves don't end when people walk away. They settle quietly, waiting patient, unfinished, and unresolved. This is a story about a woman who built a peaceful life believing calm was enough, until the past returned and asked her a gentle question. What if love doesn't disturb your peace, but completes it? If you enjoy slow, emotional romances, quiet storytelling, and stories that feel real and comforting, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories like this one. Your support truly helps this channel grow. Now, settle in, the story begins. At 35, Alina Whitman had learned the sound of her own company. It was a soft sound, measured footsteps across hardwood floors, the steady hum of the refrigerator at night, the gentle creak of the porch swing when the wind moved just right. Her life, like the small coastal town of Briar's Cove where she lived, no longer demanded attention. It simply existed, calm and self-contained, waiting. Each morning began the same way. Alina woke just before sunrise, not because she needed to, but because her body preferred the quiet before the world spoke too loudly. She padded barefoot into the kitchen of her restored craftsman house, tying her hair into a loose knot, and brewed coffee strong enough to fog the windows. From the table by the bay window, she watched the ocean change color, steel gray to pale blue, one slow breath at a time. She had chosen this house 5 years earlier, during a season when decisions felt heavier than they should have. It was a time when she had left behind a life that no longer fit, a long relationship that faded without drama, a city apartment filled with echoes, a future that once felt certain, and then, suddenly, didn't. Briar's Cove had been meant to be temporary, just a pause. Somehow, the pause had turned into home. Alina worked as a book editor remotely, which suited her temperament. She loved working with words quietly, carefully shaping stories from behind the scenes. The authors often forgot her name, but they remembered how she made their writing better. It was enough. At night, she read novels she'd already read once before, the comfort of familiar endings soothing her more than surprise ever could. In town, she was known as kind, dependable, and a little reserved. She volunteered at the local library twice a week, always taking the early shift. She shopped at the same farmer's market stall every Saturday and bought the same bouquet of wildflowers, which she placed in a chipped blue vase inherited from her mother. Her life was predictable, but it wasn't empty. It was full in a quiet way, like a room filled with warm light but no noise. Still, there were moments fleeting, usually uninvited, when memory softened the edges of her thoughts. They often arrived without warning. A familiar song drifting from an open car window, the scent of rain on sun-warmed pavement, a laugh that wasn't his, but carried the same rhythm. In those moments, Alina didn't resist. She let the memories come and go like waves, neither chasing nor pushing them away. His name was Daniel Reed. He belonged to another version of her life, a younger one, braver perhaps, or simply less careful. They had met years ago, back when both of them believed love was something you ran toward without looking back. They shared dreams over late-night diners and long drives with the windows down. They spoke the language of someday with ease, but someday had arrived differently for each of them. The end had not been dramatic. No shouting, no betrayal, just timing that refused to bend. Careers pulled them in opposite directions, and neither had known how to ask the other to change without losing something essential. Eventually, love alone proved insufficient, and so they had let go, believing that was the kindest option. Alina thought she had made peace with that chapter. Most days she had. This particular morning, after finishing her coffee, she wrapped herself in a cardigan and stepped onto the porch. The air was cool, carrying salt and pine. Across the street, Mrs. Hargreave watered her roses, waving as she always did. Alina waved back, smiling without effort. It was a good morning, the kind she had built her life around. Later, as the town stirred awake, Alina walked to the library. The bell above the door chimed as she entered, and the familiar scent of old books welcomed her. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, dust motes floating lazily in the air. She arranged returned books, straightened chairs, and reviewed the schedule for the upcoming town fundraiser. That was when the head librarian mentioned it casually, flipping through a clipboard. "Did you hear?" she said. "They're restoring the old marina. The architect overseeing the project just arrived from the city." Alina hummed politely, not especially interested. "I think his name is Daniel. He grew up here, apparently. Left years ago." The name landed softly, but firmly, like a door closing somewhere inside her. Alina kept her expression neutral. She had taught herself that skill well. Names, after all, were just names. Still, as she walked home later that afternoon, she noticed things she hadn't before. The way the marina sat at the edge of town, like an unfinished thought. The way the past and present often crossed paths in places small enough to remember you. She told herself it was coincidence. Briar's Cove wasn't large, but neither was the world. That evening, she cooked dinner slowly, carefully chopping vegetables, letting the rhythm calm her. She ate by candlelight without thinking why. Old habits, perhaps. Outside, the sound of waves rose and fell. Later, curled up on the sofa with a blanket and a book, Alina found herself rereading the same paragraph, her thoughts drifting. She looked around the room, the hardwood floors she'd restored herself, the framed photographs of family, the plants thriving under her care. This was a life she had chosen deliberately. And yet, there are moments, even in carefully built lives, when the quiet shifts, not loudly, not abruptly, but just enough to remind you that some stories are not finished simply because you stopped reading them. That night, Alina stood by the window before bed, looking out at the moonlit street. She felt calm as she usually did. But beneath the calm was something else. Not fear, not hope, recognition. Whatever was coming, she would meet it as she had everything else in this town, slowly, thoughtfully, and with a heart that remembered how to love, even in silence. And somewhere beyond the quiet she had built, something old was stirring, preparing to return. The day Daniel Reed came back into Aliner's life, the sky was the kind of clear blue that made everything look sharper. Edges of rooftops, lines of telephone wires, even the seagulls circling above the marina. Everything seemed outlined with more intention, as if the town had quietly decided to pay attention. Aliner hadn't gone to the marina to look for him. She had gone because the library fundraiser posters needed to be hung where people would actually see them. And the marina, even under construction, was about to become the town's newest attraction. That was all. Practical, simple, just another thing on her neatly organized to-do list. She parked a little farther away than necessary, as she always did, preferring a short walk to the front row convenience others seemed to love. The air smelled of salt and sawdust, a strange blend of sea and fresh-cut lumber. She could hear the low murmur of voices, the clank of tools, the dull thud of materials being moved. The marina had changed since she first moved to Briar's Cove. Where there had been sagging dock planks and peeling paint, there were now stacks of new boards, rolls of rope, and crisp white tarps fluttering like flags. Orange cones marked boundaries, and a few workers in hard hats moved with focused purpose. Aliner held the rolled posters under one arm, her bag slung over the other, and made her way toward the small temporary office set up in a refurbished storage shed near the water. A laminated sign on the door read, Project Management / Site Office. She lifted her hand to knock. The door opened before she touched it. He stood in the doorway, framed by the dim office behind him and the brightness of the day around them. For a second, just one, her mind refused to connect the image in front of her with the one she carried tucked away in memory. Daniel. He was older, of course. They both were. His dark hair was a little shorter, with the faintest trace of silver near his temples. His jawline was more defined, his shoulders broader under a simple navy button-down rolled at the sleeves. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind that came from years of squinting at sunlight or smiling too often, or both. But his eyes, those were unchanged. Warm brown, steady, quietly observant, eyes that used to look at her as if she were the only thing in the room worth paying attention to. Eyes that knew her laugh, her fears, the way she liked her coffee, the books she read when she couldn't sleep. Those eyes widened now, just slightly. Ellie, he said, voice soft with disbelief. No one had called her that in years. Her heartbeat stumbled. It wasn't a dramatic rush or dizzying spin, more like the sudden awareness of a rhythm she had taken for granted. Aliner inhaled, slow and deliberate, the way she did when she needed to steady herself. "Hi, Daniel," she managed, her voice calm, almost even. "It's been a while." The corner of his mouth lifted, a small, surprised smile that didn't quite know how big it was allowed to be. "You're here," he said, glancing past her briefly, as if needing to confirm this wasn't something he had imagined. "In Briar's Cove." "In the flesh," she replied, then winced inwardly at her own awkwardness. "I, live here. I've lived here for a few years now." He blinked, that quiet, processing blink she remembered. "You live here," he repeated. "Of course you do." Silence settled between them for a heartbeat or two, not uncomfortable, but charged, like the air before a summer storm. Around them, the sounds of work continued. The call of a foreman, the whir of machinery, the distant crash of waves against the rocks. Alina realized she was still standing in the doorway, the posters beginning to unfurl slightly in her arm. "I'm actually here about these," she said, grateful for something practical to focus on. She lifted the posters. "Library fundraiser." "I was hoping to hang a few near the entrance, just to catch people on their way in." "Right." Daniel stepped back, holding the door wider, the habit of courtesy still intact. "Do you want to come in for a second? It's loud out here." She hesitated only briefly before stepping inside. The office was small but orderly, a desk with rolled blueprints, a laptop, a large corkboard crowded with pinned drawings and notes. A large window overlooked the marina, letting in enough light to soften the industrial feel. A thermos and 2 paper cups sat on a metal shelf. "It's not much, but it's home for now," he said lightly. "Well, home during daylight hours." Alina placed her things on the edge of the desk, carefully smoothing one of the posters. She could feel his eyes on her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that reminded her of old habits, how he used to watch her when she concentrated, as if thinking was something worth witnessing. "You're the architect," she said, glancing at the plans on the wall. "The one who grew up here." "That's what they tell me," he replied. His smile was warmer now, easier. "I left for a while, came back when they offered me the project." He paused. "I didn't know you were here, Ellie. I promise you that." She nodded. "I believe you." He watched her for another moment, then gestured to the posters. "Want help hanging those? I can have someone put them up where foot traffic's highest." "That would be great, actually. Thank you." As they discussed placement, their conversation started to find a gentler rhythm. It wasn't like it used to be carefree, full of teasing and late-night laughter. It was quieter now, tinged with years and distance. But beneath the new carefulness, something familiar stirred. When they finished, Daniel reached for the thermos. "I was about to make myself a cup," he said. "Can I offer you one? It's not as good as the stuff we used to get at that place on 7th back in the city, but it's not terrible either." Memories rose at the mention of that old cafe. Rainy afternoons, shared scones, her feet tucked under his in cramped chairs. Alina allowed herself a small smile. "Sure," she said. "I have a high tolerance for mediocre coffee." He poured, handed her a cup, their fingers brushing briefly. It was a small touch, barely there, but it sent a quiet awareness through her. Not fireworks, not the rush of striking a match. More like the warmth of a forgotten ember that hadn't quite gone out. She drew her hand back slowly, wrapping it around the cup. He noticed, she could tell, not because he pulled away, but because his expression softened, the way it always did when he was careful with her feelings. "So," he said, leaning back against the desk, arms loosely crossed, not defensive, just relaxed. "You're happy here?" The question was simple. The weight behind it wasn't. "I am," she answered truthfully. "It's a good life. Quiet, steady." His gaze drifted toward the window, out to the water. "This town is good at that," he said. "Quiet and steady. It feels kind somehow." She followed his gaze. The marina, even under renovation, held a certain charm. Gulls landed on posts. The water glinted under the afternoon sun, and in the distance, a small boat bobbed gently. "What about you?" she asked. "Are you happy coming back?" He let out a breath, thoughtful. "I didn't think I would be," he admitted. "I left here determined to make something big of myself somewhere else. Bigger city, bigger buildings, bigger everything." A faint smile touched his lips, but the older I got, the more I realized most of what I missed wasn't big at all. Alina listened, fingers wrapped around the warm cup, feeling the calm sincerity in his voice. "There's something about designing a place like this," he continued. "Somewhere people will walk with their kids, sit on benches, watch the sunset. It feels personal, like it matters to someone's everyday life." "It will," she said softly. "Places like this always do." For a moment, Daniel just watched her, his eyes gentle. "You always did understand that," he said. "You understood the small, important things better than anyone else I knew." Compliments from him had always landed differently, never grand or exaggerated, just earnest enough to feel real. Alina shifted slightly, unused to being seen that clearly anymore. "People change," she said lightly, trying to deflect. "Some things change," he agreed. "Some things stay exactly the same." The way he said it made warmth rise in her chest and throat, slow and steady. She took a sip of coffee, more to occupy her hands than anything. They talked for a while longer, careful but genuine. About the town, the project, the library's need for new shelves, the best breakfast place nearby, practical, harmless topics. And yet, each shared detail felt like a thin new thread tying the present to the past. Eventually, Alina glanced at her watch. "I should go," she said, though part of her was surprised at how much she meant it, and didn't, all at once. "I have a manuscript waiting for me, and an editor who promised herself she'd stop working past 10. Daniel smiled faintly. "Still overworking yourself for other people's stories. Occupational hazard." He walked her to the door. Outside, the sunlight seemed a little softer, as if the afternoon were slowly tipping toward evening. "Ellie," he began, then paused, reconsidering. "Alina," he corrected gently, as if honoring who she was now. "Would it be okay if I saw you again? Properly? Maybe coffee or dinner sometime. No pressure. Her heart responded before her mind did, thudding once, firmly. She looked up at him, at the familiar eyes in an older face, at the man who had once been her almost forever. Years ago, she might have said yes without thinking. Now, she did think. She thought of the life she had built here, the routines that steadied her, the peace she had earned. She also thought of the quiet spaces that still seemed to wait for something she could not name. I don't know yet, she said honestly, and she saw his shoulders relax rather than tense, as if honesty itself was more welcome than any automatic answer. But I'm not saying no. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. I can live with that. They stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, the air between them calm, but undeniably changed. No dramatic music, no grand declarations, just two people, older now, standing on the edge of something that felt both familiar and new. Goodbye, Daniel, she said, taking a small step back. See you around, Alina, he replied. As she walked back to her car, she felt the town around her the way you feel a favorite blanket after a long day, soft, known, comforting. But beneath that comfort, there was a new awareness, a subtle hum. Her quiet life was still intact. The porch swing would still creak, the coffee would still brew, the books would still wait on her nightstand. But something had shifted. Familiar eyes had returned, not demanding, not insisting, just existing again in the same small world she occupied. And even as the sun began its slow descent over Briar's Cove, Alina couldn't help but feel that the story she thought was over had just quietly turned a new page. Daniel did not call the next day, and Alina was quietly grateful for it. She had learned, over time, that space could be a kindness. 28-year-old Alina would have waited by her phone, reading meaning into every passing hour. 35-year-old Alina understood that not everything needed to rush forward in order to be real. Still, when her phone buzzed 3 days later, while she stood in the produce aisle of the small market downtown, her body reacted before her thoughts did. Daniel. The name on the screen felt strangely intimate, as if it had always belonged there. I realized I never officially apologized for surprising you the other day. Would you let me make it up to you with coffee? No expectations, just conversation. She stood there longer than necessary, a basket of lemons hanging from her arm, rereading the message. The tone was gentle, respectful, exactly as she remembered him when he was at his best. After a moment, she typed back, "Coffee sounds nice. I'm free tomorrow morning." The reply came quickly. "Tomorrow it is. There's a place on Harbor Street that still makes a decent latte." She smiled despite herself. Of course, he already knew where to go. The cafe on Harbor Street was small and unpretentious, with weathered wood tables and large windows that let the morning light spill onto the floor. Alina arrived early, choosing a table near the window. She placed her bag neatly at her feet, folded her hands around the mug, she'd ordered, and waited. When Daniel walked in, she noticed the way his eyes scanned the room automatically before settling on her. His smile this time was calmer, more assured, as if seeing her again had confirmed something he hadn't quite allowed himself to believe yet. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from her. "Hi," she replied. There was no awkwardness, just a soft, careful politeness that felt earned. They talked at first about neutral things, the progress at the marina, the town council's endless meetings, the cafe's stubborn refusal to update its playlist. It was only after the second round of coffee that the conversation deepened, the way rivers do when they abandon the shore. "I didn't come back for you," Daniel said quietly, eyes on his mug, "but seeing you here made me realize something." Alina waited. She had learned the power of letting silence do its work. "I never stopped wondering how you were," he continued. "I just didn't think I deserved to ask." Her chest tightened, not painfully, but with something like recognition. "We were both doing what we thought we had to," she said. "At the time." He looked at her then, really looked at her. "Do you still believe that?" She considered the question. Outside, a couple walked past holding hands, their laughter drifting briefly through the open door. "I believe we did the best we could with who we were," she said at last. "That doesn't mean it didn't hurt." Daniel nodded. "No, it doesn't." After that, something in the air seemed to shift, not toward heaviness, but toward honesty. The kind that feels like unclenching a fist you didn't realize you were holding. They lingered longer than either had planned. When they finally stood to leave, Daniel hesitated. "There's a lookout point out by the bluff," he said. "You used to love it at this time of year. The wildflowers should be blooming." Alina met his gaze. She felt the question beneath the suggestion, the careful allowance of choice. "I still love it," she said. The path to the bluff was familiar, but walking it beside him felt different. The sound of their footsteps matched naturally, not forced. The sky stretched wide above them, pale and patient. They stopped at the edge, where the land dropped away into the open sea. Wind moved through the grass and wildflowers, softening everything it touched. Neither spoke at first. Daniel leaned against the wooden railing, close enough that Alina could feel his presence without it pressing against her. The distance between them felt intentional, not fear, but respect. "I didn't expect this town to feel like home again," he said after a while. "But it does. And I didn't expect you to be part of that." Alina folded her arms lightly, cardigan brushing her fingertips. "I didn't expect to feel unsettled," she admitted. "In a good way." He glanced at her, something warm and cautious in his expression. "I don't want to disrupt what you've built." She believed him, and that was what made the moment dangerous in the quietest way. They talked of small things again, books, favorite meals, the way Briar's Cove slowed time without asking permission. Somewhere between sentences, Daniel laughed, softly, fully. The sound moved through her with startling familiarity. Without thinking, she reached out and rested her hand lightly on his forearm. The touch was brief, instinctive, but Daniel went still, not pulling away, not leaning in, just letting the connection exist. When she looked up at him, his expression was unreadable and entirely open all at once. "You can take your time," he said, voice low. "I'm not here to rush you, or anyone." Her hand remained where it was for another moment before she let it fall back to her side. "Thank you," she said. She meant it more deeply than he could know. They began to see each other slowly after that. Not dates, exactly. Walks through town. Shared meals at neutral places. A casual visit to the library where Daniel asked thoughtful questions and admired her work without patronizing it. Nothing was labeled. Nothing was demanded. And yet, the moments piled up. A shared umbrella during a sudden rainstorm, their shoulders brushing as they laughed at their luck. Daniel fixing the loose hinge on her garden gate without being asked, his presence calm and unassuming. Alina catching herself wondering what he'd think of a book she was reading, and then smiling when she remembered she could simply ask. One evening, as they sat on her porch watching the light fade, Daniel spoke again. "I always imagined you'd be married by now," he said gently. "With a house full of noise," she smiled. "I imagined the same." "But you're happy," he said, not a question. "I am," she answered. "I just learned that happiness doesn't always look the way we expect." He nodded, absorbing that. "Would you want it to look different now?" The question was quiet. No pressure. No promise. Alina watched the porch light flicker on, illuminating the familiar space she had made her own. She thought of all the nights she'd sat there alone, content, but untouched. She thought of the way the town seemed to hum differently since Daniel's return. "I don't know yet," she said honestly, "but I'm listening." Daniel smiled, slow and sincere. "That's more than enough for me." As the evening settled around them, Alina felt the edges of her quiet life begin to soften, not unravel, not disappear, but widen, just enough to let something else share the space. Some moments don't ask you to change everything. Some only ask you to stay present, to remain open long enough to notice that love, when patient, does not arrive loudly. It arrives gently. And this time, Alina didn't look away. The first time Daniel kissed Alina again, it happened without planning. There were no carefully chosen words or dramatic pauses. No grand decision made aloud. It came quietly, the way most meaningful things in her life now seemed to, gently, naturally, as if it had simply been waiting for the right moment to exist. They were in her kitchen, late afternoon light spilling across the counters. Alina had invited Daniel over for dinner, insisting it wasn't a date, even though neither of them fully believed that. She cooked while he sat at the small table, sleeves rolled up, telling her about the marina's progress. He spoke with his hands sometimes, animated in a way she didn't remember from before. Or maybe she hadn't noticed it back then. She liked noticing now. The room smelled of roasted vegetables and warm bread. Music played softly from her phone, something instrumental and calm. Everything about the moment felt ordinary, and because of that, it felt safe. Daniel finished his story and stood, wandering closer. "You always cooked like this," he said, "like you cared enough to make it good, but never enough to stress yourself out." She laughed. "That's generous. I burned pasta more than once in my 20s. He smiled. "Still tasted good." She turned toward him then, wooden spoon in hand, ready with a teasing reply. But she stopped when she realized how close he stood, close enough that she could see the faint scar on his chin she'd once traced with her thumb, close enough to feel his warmth. The conversation ended there, not abruptly, but softly, like falling asleep mid-thought. Daniel lifted his hand slowly, clearly giving her time to step back. When she didn't, his fingers brushed a strand of hair from her face, lingering just long enough to ask permission without words. Aliner's breath caught, shallow but steady. "Yes," she whispered, though she wasn't sure whether she was answering him or herself. The kiss was unhurried, not the fire of something new, not the desperation of something lost, but something deeper. Familiar, yes, but reshaped by time. His lips were warm, gentle, as if he were reminding rather than claiming. Aliner's hand rested against his chest, feeling the slow, solid rhythm of his heartbeat beneath her palm. It felt like coming home to a place you didn't know you still had a key to. They parted slowly, foreheads resting together. "Is that okay?" he asked quietly. She smiled, her voice soft but certain. "It is." After that, things changed, but not all at once. Their closeness grew in layers, fingers lacing together during walks. Daniel's arm around her shoulders when the wind picked up by the water. Alina leaning against him on her porch, not because she needed support, but because she wanted contact. They talked more honestly too. One evening, wrapped in blankets on her sofa, Daniel admitted, "I was scared before, scared that choosing the wrong thing would cost me everything." She nodded. "Me too. I think that's why we were so careful with each other this time." He brushed his thumb along her knuckles. "I don't want to miss you again." The words settled into her chest, heavy but welcome. She realized then that love wasn't asking her to give up the life she had built. It wasn't dismantling her routines or demanding grand gestures. It was meeting her exactly where she stood and offering companionship instead of rescue. Still, doubt didn't disappear overnight. There were moments when Alina caught herself holding back, a pause before leaning in, a guarded response when Daniel spoke about the future. Old instincts whispered that peace could be fragile, that wanting too much invited loss. Daniel noticed, of course. He always had. One evening, as they walked along the shoreline, the sky painted in warm shades of orange and rose, he stopped and turned to her. "You can tell me when you're afraid," he said simply. "You don't have to protect me from it." She swallowed. "What if I'm afraid of losing what I already have?" He studied her face, then nodded once. "Then we protect it together." Something about the way he said it No reassurance without action, no promise without presence, untied a quiet knot inside her. That night, they sat on the sand, shoulders touching, watching the moon rise. Daniel traced idle patterns on her arm, slow and grounding. Alina leaned into him fully, no longer questioning whether she was allowed to want this. Because she wasn't choosing chaos. She was choosing connection. As weeks passed, Briar's Cove noticed. Mrs. Hargreaves smiled more knowingly. The cafe owner began setting out 2 cups without asking. Strangers offered her that soft, observant look reserved for people who radiated quiet happiness. Alina didn't announce anything. She didn't need to. One afternoon, while helping Daniel review final plans at the marina office, she caught him watching her, not distracted, not nostalgic, just present. "What?" she asked, amused. "You're happy," he said, "in a way that fits you." She considered that. "So are you," he smiled. "I think I always was, when I stopped trying to run past it." The realization settled between them, not dramatic, just steady. This love wasn't rewriting her life. It was adding to it. And standing there, sunlight pouring through open windows, Alina understood something with sudden clarity. This wasn't the love she'd lost. It was the love she had almost missed. Quiet, patient, grown strong enough to wait until she was ready to see it. She reached for Daniel's hand, threading their fingers together. And this time, there was no hesitation at all. Only gratitude, only choice, only now. The morning the marina reopened, Briar's Cove woke up early. There were paper lanterns strung along the docks, white and pale blue, swaying gently in the breeze. Food trucks lined the nearby street, the scent of fresh pastries and coffee drifting toward the water. The town gathered slowly, neighbors greeting one another with the easy familiarity that came from years of shared seasons. Alina stood near the edge of the crowd, hands folded loosely in front of her, watching Daniel from a short distance away. He moved through the space with quiet confidence, greeting town officials, answering questions, smiling at things only he noticed. He looked at home there, rooted in the present, no longer restless, and as Alina watched him, she felt something inside her settle into place. Not excitement, belonging. Daniel eventually found his way back to her, slipping his hand into hers as naturally as if it had always belonged there. "You've been staring," he teased gently. She smiled. "I'm allowed. I'm proud of you." His expression softened. "That's better than any ribbon-cutting speech." The ceremony itself was brief, remarks about community, renewal, history honored, and future invited. When the ribbon was cut and applause rippled across the water, Daniel exhaled slowly, as if releasing something long carried. Alina squeezed his hand. "How does it feel?" "Finished," he said, then corrected himself. "Started, both, I think." They walked the docks together afterward, stopping to admire the boats, greeting familiar faces. The sun climbed higher, warm and steady. Music played somewhere nearby, unhurried. At the far end of the marina, they found a quieter bench overlooking the open water. For a while, they just sat. Alina leaned her head against Daniel's shoulder, feeling the slow rise and fall of his breath. She thought about all the versions of herself that had led here. The woman who had loved him once without knowing how to stay. The woman who had learned to be alone without closing herself off. The woman she was now, choosing companionship not out of need, but desire. I used to think peace meant solitude, she said softly. Daniel turned slightly toward her. And now I think peace is knowing you don't have to choose between loving someone and being yourself. He pressed a kiss to her temple, lingering. That sounds like something you've earned. Later that evening, after the town dispersed and the lanterns glowed softly in the deepening dusk, Alina and Daniel returned to her house. The porch light welcomed them home, the familiar creak of the steps, the gentle swing moving with the breeze. It was all the same. Inside, the house felt fuller without being crowded. They moved through the space easily, cooking together, laughing quietly, sharing stories they hadn't yet told. At one point, Daniel paused near the bookshelf, pulling down a well-worn novel. "You kept this?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "Some things are worth holding on to." He nodded, understanding more than she'd said. Later, they settled on the porch swing, a blanket drawn over their laps. The night air was cool, carrying the rhythm of waves in the distance. Daniel's arm rested around her shoulders, solid and reassuring. "There's something I want to ask you," he said after a while. Alina didn't tense. She didn't brace herself. She'd learned that fear didn't have to lead the conversation. "I want to stay," he continued. "Here, not just for the project after, but I don't want to assume anything. I don't want to shape my future without asking if you see me in it." She turned to face him fully, searching his expression. There was no urgency there, only openness. "I won't promise what I can't give," she said carefully. "But I want you here, with me, growing, not rushing." His smile was quiet and radiant. "That's all I want too." They kissed, then slow, familiar, deeply rooted. No fireworks, no sweeping declarations. Just the certainty of two people who had found one another again with clearer eyes and steadier hearts. As the night deepened, Alina rested her head against Daniel's chest, listening to the sound of him breathing, feeling the gentle weight of his presence. She thought of all the quiet mornings that would follow. Coffee shared instead of solitary. Walks taken side by side. Silences no longer empty, but companionable. Her life would still be calm, just no longer alone. And in that realization, soft and enduring, Alina understood she had arrived exactly where she was meant to be. Not at the end of a story, but at the beginning of one. She was finally ready to live, where her quiet heart, patient and whole, had finally found its place to rest. Thank you for spending this time with Alina and Daniel. This story was written as a quiet reminder that love doesn't always arrive loudly or early or only once. Sometimes it waits. Sometimes it grows alongside solitude, patience, and the courage to choose again without erasing who we've become. If you're listening to this from a season of waiting, healing, or rediscovering yourself, know this: calm does not mean empty, and opening your heart does not mean losing your peace. The two can exist together, softly, beautifully, and on your own terms. Stories like this are meant to be felt slowly, the way quiet mornings settle in or evening light lingers just a little longer than expected. If Aliner's journey resonated with you, you're not alone, and there are many more stories waiting to be told. If you enjoyed this story, please take a moment to like it. Share it with someone who enjoys calm, romantic storytelling, and subscribe to the channel for more gentle love stories, relaxing narration, and heartfelt journeys. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows more quiet hearts to find their way home. Until next time, thank you for listening.